Fantastic. Thank you all for joining in, jumping on. I'm going to open us with prayer, and then we are going to just have a great hour together. So, Father in heaven, we're so grateful that we're grateful for technology that we can do this. But even more, we're grateful for how you work in our lives, and you can use us in so many different careers. And tonight we get a chance to be part of Kevin's story. We thank you for your hand in his life. We thank you for the way you have been at work in his life. And I pray tonight that you would give him the freedom and just eliminate any stress or worry or whatever. We just want to have a conversation. And my prayer is that it would be a blessing to these guys that are tuning in. And we pray that you'd get all the glory tonight, Lord. That's our prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Mm.
So I think Jamie's going to introduce his brother, isn't he?
Yeah. Hey, I am so excited to introduce my big brother to you all this evening, and just to give you a taste of what he's meant in my life. At 7 years older than me, he was always the consummate big brother, including me with his friends, taking me to the beach, playing roller hockey, or just to be with them hanging out. But he has been and always has been a great mentor in my life and a leader for me and someone to follow, like a real role model in my life for sure. And I just want to say that growing up in the suburbs of Los Angeles, this guy was a normal kid, just like all of us. But he set some big goals for himself and really pursued his passions. And as a result of all of his hard work and determination, he's used the gifts God has given him and has become and made tremendous achievements in the Air Force and at NASA. But most importantly, at his core, he's a great man of faith, a devoted husband, a loving father to his four daughters, an incredible brother to me, and a leader in our family. So being able to sit on the sidelines of Kevin's life has been fantastic. It's been awesome. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, John.
Thank you. And I just would give you a shout out, Jamie. How awesome that you drove to Colorado to share this experience with your brother. You knew we were going to do this, and you said, "I want to be sitting next to him." And I just love your guys' friendship and the fact that you would do that. That's good stuff right there. That's why we all love Jamie Chilton. So we know we're going to love Kevin because we all love you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in. And we have some questions that Kevin's aware that we're going to ask. And as you know, you can ask questions in the chat room, and DJ is going to serve as our filter for that. And so I'll just, on the front end, full disclosure, I'll apologize in advance if we don't get to your question. Doesn't mean it wasn't important. It just means that we're probably going to get a few, and we have some we want to get through. So let's just jump in, Kevin. Question number one we're going to start with is: did you have a career plan? You went to high school, you got out of high school. Did you always know you wanted to be an astronaut? Or tell us, what was your career plan? Did you have one even?
So a little bit, John. Wait, before I begin, though, I want to thank you, John, because it may not have a time at the end. We met at Haley's wedding, and Jamie's just spoken so highly of you and this great men's group that you have, and I appreciate the invitation. I'm so sorry I can't be there in person with you all, because that's what I really wanted to do. But like you say, thank God for technology. It's the next best thing, and we'll thank my brother too for not only choking me up with that introduction, but for coming all the way out here to be part of this, because it's special to be sitting here with Jamie. So thanks. But career plan, like most young people, when I was very young, I wanted to be a fireman or a policeman or, just that sort of thing, like most young kids want to be. But I think I was greatly influenced growing up in the shadows of LA International Airport with a father who was an aeronautical engineer, a mother who had been a stewardess back in the 1940s. Back in the day when she married my father, she had to quit. That was the rules. And then my mother's very best friends were stewardesses for life, and we called them aunt and uncle, right?
Mhm.
They were just dear friends, and one was a United airline pilot, Uncle Milton, and he seemed to love what he was doing. I was fascinated. I could sit at the end of the runway at LAX on the sand dunes and watch airplanes take off all day, and so I think that evolved into a curiosity and desire to become an airline pilot. So that was my goal. I
Mhm.
wanted to grow up and be like my Uncle Milton and fly for United Airlines. And but I didn't know how to get flying lessons. I read this book that another uncle of ours gave us, Uncle Jack, that said it was called Anyone Can Fly. It was written by Jules Bergman. He was the science editor for NBC News back in those days. And I read that book and I said, by golly, he's right. I can do this. And in the book, he said, you should go down to your local airport and volunteer to fuel planes and wash them and push them around the ramp. Just do that and barter that work for flying lessons. Well, I wasn't the sharpest pencil in the box, but I knew that wasn't going to work at LAX. So, what to do? I remember asking mom, I said, hey, can I ride my bike? I got the Fisher maps out of LA and I found Hawthorne Airport. I said, well, that's not too far away. Can I ride my bike to Hawthorne Airport after school? I'm still in grammar school. No, you'll get killed. It's too much traffic. And this is where I'm glad you asked this, because it leads to a different answer to your question, or a different sequel here. This is, I think, the first time reflecting back, God had a hand in my life, and if you don't believe in providence, there's a couple stories here I'll tell you, and this is the first one. When we were kids in the summertime, what we would do in Westchester every day, we'd wake up, pick up the dial telephone and start calling our buddies and say, well, what are we doing today? Baseball, football, or can your mom drive to the beach? And we always hoped that number 3 was yes. And one day I called up the Toomey family, great family, 7 boys. And Bill was number 5 in the list, was my peer. And I didn't know his little brothers because they'd all gone off to college. And Bill says, well, my mom can't drive, but my brother Dan is home from college. And we're leaving for Manhattan Beach in 10 minutes if you can get over here. So I asked my mom, jumped on my bike, grabbed my swimsuit and towel. And with every other sweaty little kid in the neighborhood, we jumped in the back of the Toomey station wagon, which I promise you was the Chevy Chase station wagon from Family Vacation. It looked just like it, faux wood. And off we're headed to Manhattan Beach. And I'm sitting in the back of the station wagon with Bill. And I can't even see Dan's head. He's driving. I can't see his face. And I said, hey, Bill, what's your brother's name? He says, Dan. So I yell up, one of 10 kids in the car. Hey, Dan, where do you go to college? He said, he yells back, I go to the Air Force Academy. I said, what's that? He said, oh, it's a school in Colorado. You go there and when you graduate, they teach you how to fly jets. I said, oh, and well, Air Force, do you have to join the Air Force? And he said, yeah, you got to join the Air Force. And I said, well, how long do you have to be in? He said, 5 years. I said, 5 years. Okay. I said, well, how much does it cost to go to this school? And he said, it's free. That moment, sitting in the back seat of the Toomey Mobile on the way to Manhattan Beach at the age of 12, I think, maybe 13, Dan and I have tried to figure this out over the years. I decided I had to go to the Air Force Academy if I was ever going to be a United airline pilot. And, I would serve my 5 years and get out and join United. And that was my career plan.
Wow.
And what I tell folks is a funny thing happened on the way to United Airlines. I fell in love with the Air Force. And once I got in the Air Force, the opportunities, the fun, the excitement, the camaraderie, the great people I got to serve with, I kept putting it off. I kept saying, okay, well, after this assignment, I'll get out and put my application in with United. And almost 35 years after graduating from the academy, I finally retired from the Air Force. By then, there wasn't a lot of runway left to join United. So I didn't plan to be an astronaut. I didn't plan to have an Air Force career, but I did have a goal, and I think that's an important thing, is to have a goal. And because I tell you, as I knew a lot of my, we entered the class, we were class 76 at the Air Force Academy with 1,500 cadets. Only 970 of us graduated. So, you had to really want to get through that program to get through it.
Yeah.
And even though my goal wasn't honorable or noble, it wasn't to serve my country, it was to become a United Airline pilot. There's no way I was quitting. And I was working toward that goal. And what that did is it opened up all these other doors in my life going forward. For me, what I like to say is, don't be afraid of changing your goals.
Mm.
I certainly did throughout my career, but it's important to have one as you go forward.
I
No
like
matter
that.
what it is.
Hey, some of the guys don't know. So before you were an astronaut, where I know, and what were you a 4-star general? Did I read that, or what? I don't really understand all of that. So maybe just tell us what. I always, as a kid, I thought they were 5-star generals. So I was like, how come you weren't a 5-star general? What happened? I'm just messing with you.
All right. Well, you're right. There were during World War II, but they got rid of the rank. So
Yeah.
no, yeah, I started out like I didn't start out as a general. I started out as a lieutenant, like everybody else, second lieutenants, bottom of the ladder. But you're right. So, my passion to fly at the Air Force not only gave me my undergraduate education, but then they also offered me the opportunity before flight school to go to Columbia University in New York for a year of graduate school, which was, a great return to civilian life for a year, which frankly I needed, and I think that's an important lesson for me. Even though I was passionate and wanted this goal, like I said, it wasn't so much to be in the Air Force, it was to be a pilot. And after 4 years of the military rigor at the academy, I was kind of burned out on the military bit because I was a good cadet, but that's not why I was there. I really worked hard at the academics because I love school. Intramurals, it was, if you weren't an NCAA athlete, you had to play intramurals 3 seasons a year. And we had great intramurals, from full contact pad football to boxing to track, cross country. I mean, just any sport you can imagine, lacrosse. I just thrived on that. But the marching and wearing a uniform wasn't that big a deal.
Yeah.
And I really needed that year to go off and be a civilian again for a year personally. About halfway through that year, I said, this is okay being a civilian, but I really want to get back in the Air Force. And when I returned to go to flight school a year later, I was so motivated and excited to begin that journey. But, so I went through flight school, and then I got an assignment in the reconnaissance version of the F-4 Phantom and was assigned over to Okinawa, Japan, where I went over for an 18-month tour that turned into 4 years, because I had the opportunity to change airplanes there if I extended, and I converted to the F-15 and went from low altitude, high speed reconnaissance to air was the air-to-air combat was what I trained for, which I just loved. And then after that, again, another providential story. So between my junior and senior year at the Air Force Academy, I mentioned I studied engineering and I loved it. And I suddenly realized that you could be an English major at the academy and go to flight school. It didn't matter what you majored in, you just had to graduate. And I thought, I love engineering so much, I'll never use it. I'll just go be a pilot, and I'll never again, design something or have to figure out a problem using this thing I've studied for 4 years. And then that summer, in the summertime at the academy, you only get 3 weeks of vacation. The other 6 weeks are taken up with programs, either leadership programs at the academy or various things around the country and the world. They sent me to Edwards Air Force Base, California, for 6 weeks of summer research in engineering, to be an engineering officer for that summer, working on the X-24B lifting body program, which was the last rocket-propelled drop off a B-52 with a man in it, kind of like the X-15, and fly it. And I got to work with the pilots and reduce data from their test flights and stuff. And I realized all these pilots were engineers. In fact, they had to be, because they were test pilots. And I went, oh, you can be an engineer and a pilot. So between my junior and senior year, I thought, well, before I go to United Airlines, I'll try to see if I can become a test pilot. And, if I hadn't gone to Edwards, that wouldn't have happened.
Wow.
So after flying air to air and F-15s for a couple tours, I applied to test pilot school and I got in and went back to Edwards as a student, and then spent the next, after graduating, it's a year-long course, spent 2.5 years as a test pilot, but down in Florida, where we did mostly weapons testing and systems testing off fighter aircraft. It's a lot of fun. And then, and again, I was loving being in the Air Force, and it turns out NASA only hired test pilots to be shuttle pilots. So
Wow.
a lot of the guys I was stationed with down there had applied. I remember the year I showed up, I was brand new right out of test pilot school. It was in January of '85. And NASA had announced they were going to select another class of astronauts. And I came into the squadron with all these other test pilots, far more experienced, and every one of them was applying to be a NASA astronaut. And one of them asked me, well, are you going to apply? I said, no, I didn't go to test pilot school to be an astronaut. I want to be a test pilot. And so I was the only guy that year that didn't apply in the whole wing. But then you roll the clock forward about 2.5 years, and I'm getting ready to rotate out of that assignment. Actually, they were going to start, it was time for me to go to school, professional military school, leadership school. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure I want to be an astronaut, but I sure would kick myself in the rear looking back, not knowing would they have taken me if I'd applied. I'll never know if I don't throw my hat in the ring. So I did. I applied. Not sure I wanted to do it. I fortunately got invited down for an interview. And then you spend a week there for that. There's a lot of physical examinations and psychological tests and stuff. But time you get to spend too with people in the shuttle program, astronauts and engineers. And I went, after that week, John, I said, oh my gosh, I really want to do this. This is a great group of people. So again, I think that without me knowing it, the hand of God is kind of, not moving in certain directions. And
No.
I was fortunate to get selected to do that. And I did that. So I was 11 years in the Air Force, never really left, but I worked at NASA for them for 11 more years. And then, I had the opportunity to return to the Air Force, which was really pretty unique in those days, for 13 more years, and rounded out my career in the Air Force.
Wow. So good. Let me move on to another question. At our church, mentoring is really part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
We believe in it. When I look at my life, I just think God has used other men in my life to build into my life, to show me the way, to put an arm around me and say, you'll get through this, whatever it is. But I would love to have you reflect with us. Tell us about the role of mentors in your life.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it has to start with our parents, our mom and dad, without a doubt. And they were great. When I was a kid, people, through life say, well, who are your heroes? Baseball players, but no, my heroes were my mom and dad, always. I mean, they're above Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and, Sandy Koufax. I was a great baseball fan, still am, but mom and dad were at the top of the list. And, till the day they died, they were mentors to us. They'd share pearls of wisdom, and because they loved us, right? I mean, they loved us, and in a way that we could never understand until we had our own children, right?
A lot of tough love.
Sometimes tough love, but we all need that on occasion. But I had terrific teachers, some standout teachers in high school, who one in particular I still keep in touch with. It was my theology teacher. I think Peter senior year, and these, again, people really cared about you personally. Mm-hmm. But as formal mentorship, it's in the Air Force, that's part of our job as leaders, is to mentor those under us, under our commands. And so when I showed up as a second lieutenant in my first squadron in Okinawa, Japan, with all of I guess probably about 50 hours in the mighty F-4 Phantom, I was assigned to A flight in the 15th Attack Reconnaissance Squadron. There was A, B, C, and D flight, and my A flight commander, Major Bob Smith, was no doubt my mentor. I mean, this guy, he was going to take this second lieutenant and shape him and grow him, and he's just fantastic. And then Bob worked for our squadron commander, Ken Habedank. And Ken Habedank had a huge influence on my life and the way I, as a leader, grew and remembered some of the things he taught me through the rest of my career. And I can say that in just about every job I had. Of course, you have a boss all the time in the Air Force, someone senior to you. They felt it's their responsibility to mentor me. On the faith side, sometimes because we moved around so much, you always, I was a regular churchgoer, and I'm Roman Catholic, and that's my anchor. I can remember some tough times as a cadet at the academy, some really tough personal times I was having. And I went and knocked on the door of the chaplain there at the Air Force Academy, the Catholic chaplain, and the guy pulled me up out of the depths of depression. Sometimes, mentors reach out and help you. Sometimes you got to ask for help. And it's important to have the humility to ask for help. And you'd be surprised what gold you find in that mind.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. I want to, it's not on here. It's a follow-up to the mentoring. I'd love to have you just reflect on kind of the balance or imbalance between mentor as teacher or boss and mentor as friend, and like we're not in the classroom, but I know they care about me, or like the personal side. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, so I've talked about this superior subordinate relationship in the military, and I've talked about a faith mentor, and my parents. But you also, I think it's important, and that's why I love this forum and what you all do. Look, we all have our burdens to bear, our crosses to bear, and mostly we don't talk about them. And we keep on, but everybody's got a rucksack on their back, and there's never zero rocks in that rucksack. Sometimes there's a few, sometimes there's a ton. And typically as men, we do our best not to let anybody know that there's anything in that rucksack. So oftentimes, in my view, and this is why what I define as a close personal friend, which I have, and I count my brother as one. My brother's a guy I can tell anything to. And I can bounce ideas off him. And what do you think about this? And what do that's a form of mentorship. It's a trusting relationship to you. I have a lot of friends. I should say I have a lot of acquaintances that I've made over the years. You count your friends usually on one or two hands, but in this sense of the definition, there's nothing you won't talk to them about. And you will seek their help when you need it. And they will drop everything and come to your aid, because that's a trusting relationship. And that's typically not a number that's in the tens or the teens. It's usually a small number of people, and they too become mentors in your life. And but I love this group because it doesn't have to be that intimate. It doesn't have to be that intimate to be effective. And so that's how I'd answer that, John.
Next question. How did you deal with an issue that most of us are dealing with, the family career balance, especially in the rigorous career that you had? As a pastor, they often say that the church is the pastor's mistress. I would imagine that in the military, they would say, NASA was but how did you balance that family career thing?
Well, you'd have to ask my wife, I think, to give me the grade, right, and my children. But I did make it a priority to try. And I think, a good friend of mine, Jimmy Hackett, we were cadets together, and still good friends over the years. He and I were given a talk on leadership at Notre Dame together. We were doing a team talk, and that question came up, and I gave my answer, and which was kind of like, you can do it. And then Jim, who is a senior executive in an oil company, he said, forget about it. You can't do it. There's no such thing as balance. And I looked at him and I went, you know what? You're right. You're never, you think about a balance, it's never, if it's actually level, it's only for a microsecond, then it tips one way or the other, right? And so I've seen families fall apart because people didn't pay attention to that. That would be my answer, John, is in my career, I always thought about it and I always tried to make it a priority, and where I could, within the limitations of my duty as an Air Force officer, I would spend time. I would, rather than stay late at the office, I'd come home from my kids' soccer games. And it was also a leadership thing, because one of the things I always stressed to the people I was in charge of is that here's the great paradox in the military we talk about. What's more important, the mission or the people? And my answer to that, I'm a mission guy. If you're wearing the uniform of the country, the citizens of this country expect the mission to get done. Okay. And sometimes people sacrifice for that. In fact, sometimes they die, right, in the military for that, to get that mission done. So that kind of puts things in perspective. But I say, look, and I told my people, I'm a mission guy, but I can't get the mission done if you're not healthy. And to be healthy, I want you to be physically fit. I want you to be mentally fit. I want you to have a book by the side of your bed at night and improving yourself. I want you to be spiritually fit. I don't care how you do that and what faith you're a member of, but you got to be spiritually right. And you got to take care of your family. Because if there's something going wrong at home and then I would say, and I'm telling you this for selfish reasons, because I'm a mission guy. And if you don't do those 4 things, you're not going to be able to help me get this mission done. And probably the worst is to have a family issue at home that is hanging over your head when you're at the office or flying your jet or whatever. It's distracting you. And whether you're conscious of the distraction or not, it's there. And so you're likely never to be in balance, but you should never stop working toward, and likely the imbalance is going to be toward work. It's going to be toward work. You have responsibilities. You got to bring home the bacon for your family. You've got to work. You've got to be good at what you do. So typically the balance is going to be shifted toward that, but you got to work to try to push that back up and over. And when you have the opportunity to shift the balance completely on a weekend or a family vacation, you do it. You go all in. And I think if my children were here today, they would say there was a lot of times Dad wasn't around, but when he was around, he was present. And there was no doubt in our mind that we were the most important things in his life, and that he regretted not to being able to spend more time with us when he couldn't.
Yeah, great. Let's talk about disappointments. Tell us about a time when you didn't get what you expected and how you handled it.
Yeah, I've had several in my career. And I think what I've learned from that is don't expect stuff. In all humility, well, I'll tell you the stories, but because the outcomes turned out fantastic. But at the time, they were personally disappointing because of my expectations, but that wasn't God. It was either not the Air Force's plan or not God's plan, and probably both. So when I graduated from pilot training, the rule in those days was number one guy in the class got the number one choice airplane. And my number one choice was the F-15. It was the newest fighter airplane out there. And assignments came down, and it turns out I was the top grad in the class, and somebody else got the one F-15 and I didn't. And I thought, well, what's with that? And not only that, my second choice was actually the airplane I got, the reconnaissance version of the F-4, but I wanted to go to Germany. There's a base over there. So I had put that second choice, RF-4 to Zweibrück in Germany. Well, they announced it, RF-4 to Kadena Air Base, Okinawa. And I go, that doesn't sound like Germany to me. Where the heck is Okinawa? Get a map out, it's on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. And so, for a minute there, I was, weeping in my beer, but then you pick yourself up and say, okay, well, here we go. Let's go learn how to fly the F-4 and go to Okinawa. Well, turns out I get over there, and again, because of great leadership and opportunities and timing and providence, I told you I went over on an 18-month assignment. Halfway through it, the wing converted to F-15s, half the wing converted. And my boss said, argued with the wing commander, said we should let one of the young RF-4 guys convert to the F-15. And they agreed. And they picked me. So that's why I ended up staying there 4 years. And I eventually did get to fly the F-15. And I was a much better F-15 pilot, having had that experience of flying the F-4. I mean, it just gave me such a leg up. So
No.
the second one was, again, coming out of test pilot school. Again, the rule was you graduated number one, you got your first pick. Well, I didn't know if I was going to graduate number one, but I knew what I wanted to do. And I wanted to go to Nellis Air Force Base, and I wanted to fly fighters out there, operational test with the Fighter Weapons School. And they'd actually come out and said, we've put in a by name request for you. We have a slot for one test pilot. It's empty. We want you to come fill it. Well, about 2 weeks before graduation, the commandant at test pilot school calls me into his office, and which was unusual. And he said, Chili, that was my nickname. You're going to graduate number one in the class. And I said, whoa, thanks, sir. And he says, yep. And Nellis Air Force Base really wants you, but Eglin Air Force Base really needs you. You're going to Eglin. Again, what do you say? Yes, sir. Boy, this isn't right. Wow. Well, guess where my wife, by the way, future wife, was a classmate at test pilot school. She got assigned to Eglin. Well, guess what blossomed down at Eglin? My marriage, with the fruits of that. And had I gone to Nellis, I doubt it would have happened. That long range relationships are tough to sustain. Yeah. So, my thoughts were, when life's disappointments hit you, okay, feel sorry for yourself for a few minutes, just to get over it. And then just go off and do the best you can. And in a faith sense, accept that maybe this is what you're supposed to be doing. Maybe this is part of God's will. And just, push it up, go as fast as you can, and as hard as you can, and do the best you can. And you'd be surprised what comes of it.
I love how you kind of use that filter of your personal faith to say, maybe you keep using the word, the providential, like God's in this. I got to trust that there's a reason. I don't get it. I don't agree with it. I don't understand it, but maybe looking back, I'll see God's hand in it.
Yeah. And John, a lot of that is hindsight, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure I was thinking that way at the time. That's why I want to share it. I think we all go through life, for people of faith. And one of the great questions we ask is, God, what do you want me to be doing here? Thy will be done. And when I say to our Father, I beg God, please help me make what you would want me to do in this life better known to me. But it was probably in the last 10 years, I started reflecting back on my career, and I was going, he's been doing that all along. And he's been opening and closing doors and providing you opportunities, which, by the way, I didn't necessarily have to pursue with vigor.
Yeah.
But I did. And I think that in hindsight, I pray in hindsight, I've been fulfilling God's will for what I should be doing in life all along.
So great. Hey, tell us real quick. I'm just imagining when you're going to go be in a space shuttle with a team, do they do training around how to get along with these? I mean, I don't even know how many people go up in the space shuttle, but is it 6 of you or 4 of you or 8 of you or?
Typically the smallest crew was 5 and the largest was 7. So I flew on missions with both, with 5 and 6 and 7, all 3, I should say.
I mean, it'd be a problem if there was some major relational strain or I mean, did they train you with that? What's that like?
I think it was part of the selection process. I mentioned that week-long interview included meetings with psychiatrists, taking a battery of psychiatric tests and psychologists. And then, you did all these physical exams and that sort of stuff. And then during the week, you had your interview. And typically for my class, there was 25 of us. They interviewed 125. So they did 5 weeks of interviews, 25 at a time, and to pick 15, and this is out of thousands of applications to winnow it down to that. And you're there going through this process, and but the interview is only 45 minutes to an hour, And you go into this room and there's people there's astronauts in there, there's managements in there, there's, the equal opportunity folks are in there, just the whole kind of bureaucracy of NASA. They start asking you questions. And I'm convinced, since they know everything there is to know about you on paper, because you filled out this application, you got your resume and all that in there. But I think the astronauts in the room and NASA were asking themselves two questions during the interview. One, would this person ever embarrass NASA? Because you're going to be on TV, you're going to be in the limelight, you're going to be a public person. We're going to put you out in front of the public and have you speak. Do you have a character flaw that would lead you to embarrass this organization? And the second question was, could I live with this person in a telephone booth for 2 weeks? Because that is what it's like in the space shuttle. I mean, it looks really roomy in there. It's not, particularly when there's 7 folks in there. Now you do have the added volume of being able to sit on the ceiling, or, you can use the whole room, right? You're not just stuck to the floor. In fact, you're never stuck to the floor. But yeah, interpersonal relationships and getting along in stressful conditions occasionally, like launch or things happen on orbit or reentry, is really important. And so that was taken into account when crews were selected, personality matches and stuff like that. Certainly talent, there was certainly mission essential talent you needed. But then as soon as you were assigned as a crew, you were all shoved into the same office. We were scattered around, but once you were a crew, you moved your desk into the same office. And there was 60-hour weeks for a year, with, I think we maybe got a week off to take a family vacation in the middle of that. That was a typical training cycle. So you live with your crewmates in tight quarters and simulators and trips and whatever you had to do to prepare for the flight. By the time you flew, you knew each other's families well, you knew each other's well, you knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, hot buttons, and you were sensitive to that, and because you wanted spaceflight to be a happy, exciting. It was going to be exciting. You wanted it to be a happy event as well. So. But that takes work. That takes work, right? I mean, it doesn't happen automatically. We all have our, it's hard for me to imagine, how Jamie could ever not just get along with me because I'm such a wonderful guy. But I'm sure there's things I do that, get under his skin on occasion.
All it takes is one sourpuss in that space shuttle to ruin the whole thing.
That's right. That's right.
Let's jump to your wife. How did she stand with you through the space? This is the way the question's written. How did your wife stand with you through Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, 9/11, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and your flight on the Space Shuttle Atlantis?
Yeah. So, Kathy was a rock, first of all. But a little bit about her background. She's the daughter of a fighter pilot, Air Force fighter pilot, who served in Vietnam. She's a physics major. In fact, she's got a master's in physics. She was a flight test engineer. I told you we met at test pilot school. Not only in our class, typical in a test pilot school class, you'd have 25 students, and 14 would be pilots. Then there'd be a collection of engineers and then some navigators in the class. And she was a flight test engineer. And so she had joined the Air Force out of college through ROTC and flown on airplanes. And in fact, when we were doing flight tests together down at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, she flew in F-16s and T-38s, high performance jets. And she had experienced, like I had, the loss of friends who were killed in crashes. And so I would say about Kathy, unlike most spouses there, she bore a particular burden in that she understood what the heck was going on. She understood the risks better than most. And she understood it not from an experiential perspective, but also from a technical perspective. I could talk to her about the technical pieces of the space shuttle, and she got it. She understood it. Not once did she ever ask me not to do it, because she knew I loved it. And she was a mother hen around her children to try to protect them from from those sorts of things, the fears associated with that. Fortunately, our children were young at the time when I was flying space shuttles, but they weren't young on 9/11 when I was in the Pentagon when the airplane hit the building, and they came home from school and saw the building on fire and didn't know if their dad was alive till 2 o'clock that afternoon when I walked home from the Pentagon to our house. And she was standing there the day I got in a taxi cab and said, I can't tell you where I'm going. And it was shortly after 9/11. And, just did it. She was just there for me. And so I can't say enough about Kathy, and I'll end the thought on this with a story that I'd love to share with people. Everybody thinks astronauts are heroes. We certainly don't look at ourselves that way. And I certainly look at myself not as a hero, but as just an incredibly fortunate human being who's been given that wonderful opportunity to leave the planet 3 times and come back, most importantly. So here's a picture I want to paint for you. It's 10 minutes to 3 in the morning, and it's at the Kennedy Space Center, and you're incredibly tired, and you have your 4 children with you, with the spouses of the other crew members of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, and you're in the Launch Control Center, and someone comes in and says, they picked up the count, it's time to go to the roof. And so you walk up onto the roof, and it's pitch black. There's a cold breeze blowing off the Atlantic. And 3 miles away are these xenon lights lighting up Atlantis on the launch pad. And sitting on top of Atlantis, commanding it, is your husband. And he's sitting on top of 4 million pounds of high explosive. This is post-Challenger, so you know the risk. And then your right hand is your 6-year-old daughter. In your left hand is your 4-year-old daughter. Standing next to you is a dear friend and fellow astronaut holding your 2-year-old daughter, and you're 8 months pregnant. Now, who's the hero in this picture? I am sitting exactly where I want to be. In fact, I am so relaxed that after they strapped me in, I fell asleep and took a nap while they strapped the rest of my crewmates in. I'm the most, fatalistic human being on the planet. I have been to confession. I have received the Eucharist in quarantine. I have the Eucharist in my pocket of my spacesuit that I'm going to take to space with me. And I know I'm going someplace that day, and I hope it's to space. But if it's not, I'm okay with that. I am right with my maker. But 3 miles away is my wife in the situation I just described. She's the hero. Wow. I tell you, if we had switched places, she'd been on that rocket, and that guy came in the room and said, time to go on the roof, they'd have had to carry me up there. I could not have watched my wife do, which she over and over watched me do throughout my career. She's incredible.
It's powerful. I love that. Wow. Thank you. You just mentioned having the Eucharist in your pocket in your spacesuit. Tell us about that, sharing the Eucharist on the space shuttle.
Yeah, so it wasn't an original idea. I had a dear friend, David Lowe, fellow astronaut, and we worked together down at, when you're not training to fly or flying, you have a job. And we were working together down at the Kennedy Space Center, supporting other launches, which is really exciting. And he had flown his first flight. And he told me, we went to the same church, and he told me, or no, he went to a different church, but he's Catholic as well. And he said he had taken the Eucharist into space. And I said, oh man, how special that had to be. I think I want to do that. Well, it comes time, I'm in training for my first flight, and literally there's a little bit of procrastination in me, maybe a lot. It's the night before we're going to go into quarantine, which they quarantine you 7 days before flight, because they don't want you to get sick. They don't want you exposed to anybody. So and by the way, that is the hardest thing about space flight. You ask any astronaut, is saying goodbye to your children and your wife 7 days before launch. And reflecting on the fact you may never see them again. And so anyway, it's the night before I go into quarantine, And I go down to our parish and ding dong at the rectory, Father Tom, our pastor, comes to the door and I said, "Hey, Father, I'm gonna go on a space shuttle flight here in about 7 days. And I'd really like to take the Eucharist in orbit with me. There's another Catholic crew member and let to share the Eucharist." And he goes, "Yeah, that's a great idea." And then he says, and then he paused and he goes, "You are a Eucharistic minister, aren't you?" Which requires some training. And I said, "Yeah, Father, I'm not." And he kind of dropped his head. And I said, "Don't worry, Father. I'm late to need here. Next time I'll get the training." And then he looked up at me and smiled and said, "Paperwork to follow." Off we went to the church, and he gave me the Blessed Sacrament, but in a pick, which is a little gold container, and it never left my side for the next 7 days in quarantine and the entire time on orbit. And on that flight, I shared it with my crewmate Pierre through it at a time in the flight when things were not going well. In fact, we were near mission failure. Our lives weren't at risk, but we would face the embarrassment of not accomplishing our mission. And Pierre was a linchpin in this particular portion of the mission, and I could tell he was pretty depressed. And I pulled him aside and I said, "Pierre, maybe this would be a good time to share the body of Christ." And we did. And the rest of the story is, of course, we pulled it off. It worked out. Pierre was a hero. But the story I'd like, and I carried the Eucharist on all 3 flights, John. But the one that, and every flight had there was an event on every flight, a unique event that brought me closer to God and reminded me of where I was and how I was part of this whole thing. Second flight, there was it was a 24-hour shift flight, so we had a crew of 6, a red team and a blue team, and in between shifts, when we're doing handovers, it'd be kind of a quiet time. The other members of our crew would be waking up and getting dressed and eating breakfast, and we would be kind of getting ready to do a handover briefing, and then we would eat and get ready to go to bed. Anyway, Sid Gutierrez was my commander. I was the pilot on the flight, and Tom Jones was one of our mission specialists, and all 3 of us were Catholic, and Tom was on the other shift. But so it was during this time period where there wasn't a lot of activity. He floated up on the flight deck, and we were just sitting there, and we were on the dark side of the earth. And it was just quiet and peaceful, and just the 3 of us. And Sid and I are in our seats, and Tom is literally floating between us. And I just said, "Hey, maybe this would be a good time to share the Eucharist." And it was Easter time. In fact, we were in quarantine for Easter. And yeah, let's do that. So, I took the pick out of my pocket, and we said a prayer, and then I handed the Eucharist to each of them. And again, we're on the dark side of the earth, and I have my eyes closed. And I promise you, the instant I put the Eucharist on my tongue, I felt this blast of radiant heat in my face. And, when you have your eyes closed and you look at a bright light, you see the inside of your eyelids, the red, and that I see. And it's like, it just stuns me, shocks me into opening my eyes. And we had flown into sunrise, and the sun it rises really fast up there because you're screaming at it. And it had come up right as we had taken the Eucharist, and all 3 of us had our eyes closed, and all 3 of us experienced the same moment of this flash of heat at the instant we put the Eucharist on our tongues. Now, some people might call that a coincidence. My wife calls that a God incident. And there wasn't. We kind of all looked at each other, stunned, and then there wasn't a dry eye in the cockpit. The emotional wave that rolled over us. Now here's the downside: because there's no gravity, tears don't roll down your cheek; they just fill your eyes up. Pretty soon you can't see; it's like you're underwater. But that was that. I mean, I'll take that moment to my grave.
Yeah,
powerful.
Tell us. Speaking of God and the Eucharist, my next question is, how did flying in space change or impact your faith, your belief in God? Did it?
Yeah, no, I would say it just affirmed everything I believed already. And it's so humbling to have that experience. But you could do it and not have that. I could see where you could go through that experience and not pause and reflect. I saw some such beautiful things, but when people say, well, how did that feel? I say, well, if you see a really beautiful sunrise and you're out by yourself someplace or with someone you dearly love and you share that moment, that's how it feels. Or the first time you hold a newborn infant in your arms and it's yours, that's how it feels. And you're just blown away by the gift and humbled by it, by the moment. And
Yeah.
I had a lot of those on orbit. My favorite story is, so when you're a fighter pilot, if you watch the old movies, the old World War II movies, you're always worried about the bad guy attacking you from out of the sun. They sneak up behind you out of the sun because you couldn't see him. Well, in reality, you do worry about that. And so, as a fighter pilot, we worried about that. And one of the techniques, you're always looking behind you to make sure you're not being attacked. And one of the techniques when you're looking up toward the sun is you stick your hand out, your thumb out, and close one eye and stick your thumb over the sun. And what that allows you to do, believe it or not, is to see really close to the edge of the sun all the way around. So otherwise you're just kind of blinded by it. But now that guy's got to be right in the middle of the sun. He's got to be perfect to sneak up on you.
Mm.
So it's just a common thing we do. And so everybody wants to take a picture of their hometown when they're in space, right? So LA is my hometown. And when you're going to go over based on the time you launch. So I pre-planned in my checklist, flight day 3, at this time, grab a camera, go to this window, and we're going to fly over LA, and I'm going to take a picture of my hometown. So here we are. We're coming. It was a southwest to northeast pass. We're coming up over the Pacific Ocean. I set an alarm that morning on my watch, and it's time. I get up there and I grab my series of cameras, zoom lens, wide angle. Sure enough, miracle of miracles, there's no smog that day in LA. It's crystal clear. And I'm shooting away with all these different cameras, and you don't have long as you go by. And then I decided, no, okay, I'm going to put the cameras down and just look out the window and take this all in. And then I stuck my hand out and closed one eye and put my thumb over 6 million people, covered them up. And I thought, I grew up down there. I was one of those 6 million people, and there were days in my life where I thought, this is the worst day of my life. I'll never recover from this. There's 6 million people down there. I bet there's a bunch of them that feel that exact way today. But at the same time, there's a God up here, around us, with us, who, the Bible passage, that he counts every hair. If he worries about the sparrow, how much does he worry about you? And he worries about every one of those 6 million people under my thumb. Not only that, he worries about the 6 billion other people on the planet. And that's when you start to reflect on that, and you have the opportunity to look down and cover up 6 million people with your thumb and understand that God is loving and paying attention to every single one of them and more. Man, that's heady stuff. And it just makes you so grateful.
He's bigger and better than we think.
Yep.
That all the time. I think that's just a great way to transition now into opening it up to questions. I'm going to turn it back over to DJ, and man, wow, that was such a highlight. Just the way you closed that touched me. Thank you. Thank you. DJ, why don't you take the questions that are in the chat room?
Sure. We've had a few trickling in. So I'll ask those. Feel free to just go ahead and raise your hand and wave at the screen, or there's even, if you go to the reactions tab at the bottom, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can ask it live. But let's get to some of these first here, Kevin. I believe it was Matt Cook, not Brody Cook, but maybe it could have been Brody, asked you to share a little bit about your first really big leadership challenge, whether in the Air Force or in space, when you knew that leading people was not a drill.
Wow, that's a great question. I think it may not have been my first, but one that pops to mind is when you have to discipline somebody, and they've made a mistake, and we like to say it's not a one mistake Air Force, but it is a one crime Air Force. you know, and we treat crime differently and we do mistakes. And in these cases where you have to mete out punishment are typically for crimes, and those are scalable. I'm not talking like murder or theft, but you know, things by willful violation of regulations and those sorts of things. And you know, to prepare to mete out the discipline. One thing that most people don't understand when you are a commander in the Air Force, and I had the opportunity to command at the wing level, which is about 2,000 people, at the numbered Air Force level, which was about 30,000 people, at the major command level at 18,000, and then at my last job, 40,000 people under my command. You have what's called G series orders, which means you are judge, jury, and executioner up to a certain level of punishment. And the decisions you make there can affect morale. Decisions you make there obviously can be consequential for the individual. And how you do that is a burden, frankly. But it's a duty as well. And that, I would say that was when the first time I had to do that, I kind of went, wow, you know, this isn't just, you know, patting everybody on the back and let's go play football today and have a great old time and I'll be the quarterback and everybody will do what I say. They'll run the patterns I say. This is serious business, and sometimes life and death.
That's great, man. Thank you. Another question that came in is somebody wanted to hear your thoughts on Space Force. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, I'll be honest, I wasn't in favor of it early on. You know, I commanded Air Force Space Command. So I was in charge of all the space people in the Air Force back in 2006 and 7. And I'd be the first to say the Air Force needed to make some big changes in the way we equipped and trained that force. But we were mostly constrained by policy at the time, and policy was not written by the Air Force, it was written by our civilian leaders. So I think we knew what we needed to do, we just weren't allowed to do it. The reason I wasn't in favor of the Space Force is because, remember, I said when I commanded Space Command, there was 18,000 people in the entire Air Force that do space out of, you know, 600,000. So it didn't make sense to me to have a separate service with just 18,000 people in it, with all the overhead. You know, you kind of get an upside down pyramid if you're not careful. You got more generals than you got lieutenants because you got to feed the staff in the Pentagon. You got to, you know, higher headquarters has got to be manned. But, you know, once the decision was taken, what I saw happen was suddenly people really started to pay attention to the things we had been talking about for years. And now the head of the Space Force had a platform, had a pulpit, bully pulpit to advocate for these things. And policies changed as a function of the threat that we're realizing today from China and Russia. And so you know, and of course, once the decision maker is made, I'm a big supporter. You know, I mean, that's all you can do. It's fair to have a different point of view, but once the boss makes the decision, you know, put your point of view in the rearview mirror and start rowing. You know, start rowing in the direction the boss wants to steer the ship. And I'm all in supporting the Space Force now. Even, you know, I'm 10 years retired. Anything I can do to help them, I do, because we got to get on about the business of defending our assets in space and holding at risk our adversaries' assets. We weren't allowed to do that when I was in the service, and that's a big change now.
This one might be a quick one, but how do you go to the bathroom in space, Kevin? We've always wanted to know. It's always been on our minds.
I'll give you my stock answer. Very carefully.
There are tubes involved?
No, actually, we had 8. So you imagine this: there's on our first crew, there were 7 of us. There's one toilet, and it's the toilet is it looks like a pretty normal seat, except there's no hole. There's a little hatch about that big around, and you sit on the toilet. And there's these little handles you pull up, spring loaded, you put over your thighs to hold you on the toilet so you don't go floating off. And then once you're on there, you turn on this fan in the toilet, which opens a little vent. And then you pull this lever and the hatch opens and you do your business. And when you're done, what's most important is to remember to close the hatch before you turn the fan off. And the fan just, you don't even feel it, but it gently draws air in from the cabin and keeps everything contained in the toilet. When you close that lid, another valve opens and it opens to space and it actually goes to vacuum in there. So everything is freeze dried to minimize volume. And then additionally, there's a tube on the side, and every crew member had a funnel, clear plastic funnel with your color on it. So you knew what it was, and you would put that on the end of the tube, and you would urinate into that with the fan on, and with the fan would just draw the urine down in the tube. And so that's how you did it. But you could be floating on the ceiling taking a leak. It was kind of cool.
DJ, I have a question I want to ask. I would love to have you take us through kind of liftoff. I mean, I'm imagining anxiety. You're sitting there, we're watching on TV. What's it like to be in the cockpit when you're, like you said, I don't know how many tons of what you said. Take us through that. Are you talking? What are you doing?
Yeah, so you train so much, and you all have certain responsibilities. And as the pilot, the way they designed the shuttle, just about every system that could have a problem, all those switches on your side of the cockpit. And so the pilot's the co-pilot, but so you're the systems guy. If you have an engine problem, you got an APU problem, you got an electrical problem, hydraulic problem, anything electrical, go into orbit, a reaction control jet problem, you have the switches that will either save the crew's life or not on your side. And the training you go through to be the pilot is the most intense. The commander on the other side, his job, he's always thinking about, he's doing what ifs the whole time. What if we lose an engine now? What if we lose an engine now? Because there's abort profiles. At some point, if you lose an engine, you're going to turn around, fly backwards, and come back to the Cape. Kind of like Elon Musk does today. We had a procedure to do exactly what Elon does today with his rocket first stage. If it was later in ascent, you'd maybe land in Spain. You didn't have enough gas or poop to get to orbit. Maybe you'd abort to orbit, make one rev, and land at White Sands Missile Range. So the commander is the big picture guy. And my point of this training is you were so focused on your job, what you were supposed to do during ascent, that that you weren't, we always used to say the astronaut prayer, and we would say it in the van driving out on launch morning or launch night, whenever we were launching. It would just be the crew in the van going out, and our boss, the head of flight crew operations directorate, and he would say, okay, it's time for the astronaut prayer. And it was, dear God, don't let me screw up. that was, we'd always say it. And we may have used a different word than screw up, but because that was our greatest fear. It wasn't death. I didn't fear death. I feared letting my crew down or making a mistake that would cause mission failure or harm to my crewmates. So that's a perspective you got to understand we all had on the launch pad. And then, as I mentioned, I took a nap every time. I was so right with my God, my life, and whatever was going to happen. I fell asleep on all 3 flights, waiting for my crewmates to be strapped in. And then, there's a lot of dead time there built into the count. And then you start getting serious. You get down to 10 minutes, you come out of a hold. At 4 minutes, the pilot would start the auxiliary power units. You'd feel the hydraulics come up, the engines would gimbal, the whole stack would shake a little bit as the engines gimbaled. And then at 2 minutes, we'd get the call to close your visor and turn on oxygen. And then things got kind of quiet. And as you just watch the clock, typically the commanders thanked the launch control team and everybody else that had got us prepared. And then it was just waiting for that clock to come down to 0. Funny story. They can never make a simulator quite like the real thing. So as the pilot on my first flight, I was the only rookie on the flight. And it was Endeavor's first flight. It was a maiden voyage of Endeavor. And so I have a special bond with her. She and I went to space together for the first time. And she's in LA now, my hometown. So if you get a chance to go down to LA, go see Endeavor down there at the Science Museum near USC. She's beautiful. One of the things right at liftoff, you're supposed to look at, our software would change. We had very rudimentary software, but the mode changed. So I was supposed to look at the software. I'm sorry, let me back up. Prior to liftoff, because this is the funny part. the engines, everybody as a new guy, you always ask the experienced astronauts, what's launch like? Because it's violent. What's it like? And they tell you. I never thought to ask them what it was like 6 seconds before launch when the main engines light off. So I'm sitting there and the simulator kind of would shake a little bit, on the ground, but I'm sitting in the real deal. And, the guy goes 10, 9, 8, go for main engine start, 7, 6, main engine start. And oh my goodness, the vibration in the cockpit's unbelievable. My head is banging off in the inside of my helmet. I'm supposed to be looking down at these 3 gauges that say engine percent output. They're tape gauges. They go from 0 to 100. And I'm supposed to watch them. And when they hit 100% at about 2 seconds before liftoff, I'm supposed to say 3 at 100. Very short. Everybody knows that means all 3 engines have throttled up to 100%. Well, this is time dilation sets in, just like they talk about in an automobile accident or any emergency. Everything slows down. Those 6 seconds seem like 6 minutes to me. And all I'm thinking is, if we don't launch, the wings are coming off this thing because it's shaking so much. The second thing I'm thinking is, I can't read those darn gauges because my head is shaking so much. So it gets to 2 seconds and I'm thinking, I got a decision to make here. So what did I say? 3 at 100. Who's going to know? If they're not, we're dead. So it's violent. But then 2 seconds later, boom, the solid rocket motors launch off and you get crushed back in your seat, 3 times the force of gravity. And man, there is no doubt in your mind you're going someplace that day at that moment because the acceleration, and you stay there for 2 minutes. So we've all felt acceleration in a fast car. You don't feel that force for 2 consecutive minutes. And you're just pressed back in your seat for 2 minutes. And then the solids come off and you actually are thrown forward a little bit because you go from 3 G's acceleration to less than 1, just riding the 3 main engines because you're so heavy, but you're still accelerating. And slowly over the next 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes, as the fuel burns down, the G-force starts building back up. And the last minute of flight, you're back at 3 G's again, being pressed back in your seat until boom, the engines quit. And then you're weightless. And but it's thrilling, it's exciting, but the whole time I'm paging through displays to make sure all the systems, we don't have any leaks, nothing, there's no short circuits, everything's going right with the systems. I'm doing my job. So yeah, that's kind of launch in a nutshell.
Thank you, man. This has been awesome. Do we have where are we at, DJ? Are we wrapping it up or?
Probably about time. I couldn't tell if you were just describing a space shuttle launch or a rapture, Kevin. That was. I imagine that's what being raptured feels like. That you become weightless at some point.
It's great.
Maybe we could end with one more,
sure.
and then you can wrap it up here, John. This is a really cool one, Kevin. I don't even have a name of the guy who asked this, but somebody asked, was there ever a time that you didn't have the answer and you had to ask God to guide you?
Oh, well, you just went through that, DJ.
The truth, yeah.
Did you tell us you just proposed to somebody? I mean, there's certain decisions we have to make in our life that we can never be sure of. You just don't know. I mean, you're rolling the dice. That's faith, right? I mean, part of that's faith, but at some point you got to go. And so there have been times in life I said, well, God, if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, or if this is the person that's supposed to be my partner for the rest of my life, or for a long time, I didn't get married till I was almost 34 years old. A good bit of that time I was discerning becoming a Catholic priest, and I was struggling with that, because I remember I'd be sitting at mass. I knew a lot of priests, as teachers and mentors, and sitting at mass and seeing the priest on the altar going, I could do that. And I think I would be damn good at it. And then at the same time, thinking about being a father and thinking, I can do that too and be damn good at it. And God, which one do you want me to do? Yeah. And I think he answered that question when I showed up at test pilot school and there was 25 students in the class and 1 girl. And that was Kathy. So yeah. This
has been so good. And Jamie, you've been a good co-pilot sitting there, just supporting your brother. But we want to say thank you, Kevin, for your time. Thank you for your heart. Thank you for sharing your story, letting us in. And I know I speak for everyone, man. I'm just inspired. You are just a role model. I want you to be my big brother. Will you adopt me?
John, if you can keep that invitation open to come out to meet with you guys in person. I would love,
Yeah, we're
I'd
gonna
love,
do that.
love to spend time with you. And
We look forward to that. And thank you for your generosity and sharing this time with us tonight. And guys on the call, I'm just so honored that you guys tuned in tonight. Thank you. We miss each other. We miss you. And God bless you all. And thank you, DJ and Jeff Atlas and the men's ministry team for putting this evening together. You guys did a fantastic job. Thank you.
thanks, TJ.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Kevin
Thank you,
and
Kevin.
DJ,
God bless you all.
Jamie.
Time.
Cheers.
Thank you.